Hey, thanks so much for checking us out here at Harvest Online. We're so thankful that wherever you are and whenever you're watching, we're grateful that you're making us a part of your day. If you would, click that subscribe button and check us out over on the socials, Facebook and Instagram, harvest.247. And we are going through a series called the Psalms of Ascent. These are songs and poems and things that the nation of Israel would recite when they would go back to the city of Jerusalem during the various feasts through the year. And the reason why they call them the Psalms of Ascent is because Jerusalem was on a higher plane than everything else in Israel. So they were always climbing up to the holy city, always climbing up to where the Lord was in the temple. So this is the Psalms of Ascent. And today we're going to talk about Psalm 124. And I think it's very applicable because we've all been through various hazards. And there was a time where we were traveling back from Georgia to Texas, and one of the worst downpours that I'd ever been in happened in Louisiana. And for me, when I'm traveling from one place to the other, especially from Georgia to Texas, I really want to get there in a certain amount of time. So I'm like pushing through. And I realized all of a sudden, as the rain just kept getting harder and harder, it got harder and harder to see. I'm sitting there thinking, are we in a tornado? What in the world is happening? Cars were on the side of the road pulling off, and I'm still pushing through. And Sarah's in the passenger seat saying, are you sure that we can drive in this thing? And I'm sitting there thinking, I just need help. I need help to get through this. And maybe we're right on the cusp of getting to the lighter rain, but it just never would light up. And so finally I had to pull over. Well, hazards are just a part of our life, whether they're a weather hazard, some are relational hazards, some are professional hazards, some are medical hazards, some are financial hazards, but whatever it is, we're all going to have hazards in our life. And so Psalm 124 is a psalm about hazards, and it's also a psalm about help. And so I think it's really applicable for our life and what we go through and things that circumstances in the world maybe that are out of our control, but we worry about them and we're like, man, those are hazards. And so this is such a great psalm to remind ourselves where our help and where our hope comes from. And if you're watching this, you're not really a believer in Jesus, this is also an opportunity for you to know that what the Bible talks about and what the believers of Jesus believe, that Jesus is also our help and our hope. And so let's hop right into it. Psalm 124, it says, if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side. So twice in this psalm, David, who writes it, called Israel to recognize that their hope was in God alone, that's the place that they looked for hope, that's the place that they looked for help. It wasn't that just Yahweh was present, but they had actively worked on behalf of his people. Meaning it's not that God is just up in the cosmos, God's just up there somewhere, just kind of looking around and taking in what's happening on earth, maybe has some popcorn and a soda and just kicking back and enjoying or not enjoying what's happening on earth, but that God is active in what is happening and he's active in the lives of his believers and his followers. And David is declaring that back in this period of time, and the nation of Israel is declaring that, and that's something that we can also declare today. The phrase, had it not been on our side, is the past tense of Emmanuel, which is God with us. And so when Jesus comes on the earth in the New Testament, he's called Emmanuel, meaning God with us. So here, God being on our side is the exact same kind of phraseology and idea as Emmanuel, Jesus, God coming down and being with us. And so it's, again, just this kind of ability to recognize this declaration that God doesn't just sit up on his throne and isn't active and whatever, but no, he is actually active in our life. Now, before we hop to verse 3, I want to hop to verse 8. And this is what it says: our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. And the reason that I think this is important to skip over everything that's in the middle is because Psalm 124 is bookended with the main point of the psalmist. You see it in the first verse and you see it in the last verse. Verses 1 and 2, if it had not been for the Lord, and in verse 8, the psalmist talks about our help is in the name of the Lord. It is a declaration. It starts with it and it ends with it. And it's one of those declaration that the Lord is our help, the Lord is our hope as we're navigating the hazards of our life. And I think this is exactly what David is trying to write about. And this is what the nation of Israel is declaring. And I think this is a truth that could help us in our life now, is that God is our help and he is our hope. And so this psalm is bookend with that idea that God is our helper and God is our hope in the midst of all types of hazards, in the midst of all types of circumstances that we are going to have to navigate through this life. And so if you could just step back for a moment and imagine an entire nation like coming together to Jerusalem for these various feasts, and they're all declaring this, God is our help and God is our hope, as they're kind of journeying to Jerusalem. That's pretty powerful to think about, that again, they're declaring this and getting their hearts ready to enter into the holy city of Jerusalem. Now, the psalmist continues to write about what would happen if the Lord was not on our side. So you get a declaration that the Lord is on our side, but now here's what happened. So when the people rose up against us, they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. And so the psalmist is saying, man, if it had not been for the Lord, if he had not been on our side, all of these various things would have happened. What he means when he talks about they would have swallowed him alive or swallowed us alive is continuing this thought from the first two verses of trying to say, hey, let me paint a picture of what I'm declaring and what is true. And that if that wasn't true, these are all of the things that would have happened, right? And so God is our help and God is our hope. And the psalmist is painting the picture of our life without Christ. It's like one of those things of like, if we don't have Jesus as our helper and we don't have Jesus as our hope, these are the types of things that are going to happen. However, some of you may be saying, but these are some of the things that have happened to me, and I am a follower of Jesus. Well, here's the good news about the gospel. Here's the good news about the story of God, is that even in the midst of all of these things happening, right? Even if felt like you've been swallowed up alive, or people have gotten angry with you, or maybe a flood has swept you away, or a flood of emotion has swept you away, right? Or you have had to go through raging waters. The truth of the gospel and the truth of the story of God is that Jesus is present with us in those storms and in those hazards. And that's a promise that we have, because he says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. So he'll help us in the midst of these things, and he'll also be our hope in the midst of these things. I was reading a devotion actually just today. It's actually not even in my notes. Just today with my two youngest boys, and it was talking about the storms of life. And one of the things that it talked about is that we're going to go through various storms and various hazards, friend hazards, health hazards, all these things, the very same things that we've been talking about here during this message. But one of the things that it did do at the end of the devotion is bring it back to the idea that Jesus had also been through storms, and that he had quieted storms, he had calmed storms, he was still in the midst of them, but while he's in the midst of them, he has control and power over those storms. And so that's kind of the idea here, that if God had not been with us, if he was not present, right? If he wasn't Emmanuel, God with us, then these things that we go through in life, these hazards, have the ability to just take us out. But because we have God to look to, because we have Jesus as our help and our hope, we have this understanding that we might go through raging storms and waters and floods and all these types of things in life and all these hazards, but we have a helper who is promised to be with us and to help us through them, and he is our hope through them. And so, while David is poetically describing potential ruin, he starts and he ends the psalm with the declaration that God is also our help and God is our hope. And that even though we're going to go through troubles and floods, and even though we might feel like we're swept away, but we actually aren't, because we have God as our help and God is our hope. So here's what he says: after verse 5, he comes back and he says, "Blessed be the Lord who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped." He says, "Blessed be the Lord," right? In other places in the Psalms, he talks about blessed be the Lord. He blesses his name for all the things that he's done for the nation of Israel. He blesses his name for all the things that he's done in David's personal life, right? He's like, God has not given us over to the prey of their teeth. Has he sent us into exile? Yeah. Have I gone through some topsy-turvy times? Yes. However, he has not given us fully over to the prey of their teeth. And that's the gospel right there as well, is that while this life can be treacherous, God hasn't given us fully over to Satan because he redeemed us through the cross and through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It might be difficult navigating this life, but he hasn't fully given us over to that death that we could experience because of his grace and his mercy, right? So even in the moment, God is our help and God is our hope. And then, of course, David ends, "Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth." Again, the purpose of the psalm is to bookend it with this kind of the same idea, right? If it had not been for the Lord, and then our help is in the name of the Lord. This declaration that even in the midst of the hazards of life, when we could have been overrun by waves and torrents and all these various hazards of life, we just haven't been, because God is our help and God is our hope. It's really one of those psalms that we have to receive in faith and by faith, because we've all been through various hazards and we are all going to be through various hazards. But it's not just one of those things that's like out in pie in the sky that we have to believe in. This is a testimony that David is writing. This is a testimony of his life. This is a testimony of the nation of Israel that they are singing and declaring on their way back to the feasts. And this is a testimony of so many believers who have followed Jesus for years that have said, you know what? In that scenario back there, in that financial hazard, in that professional hazard, and that relational hazard, if it had not been for the Lord, if it had not been for the Lord, I wouldn't have made it through. However, they would also say, but I found that my help is in the name of the Lord, and that by going through those hazards and seeing that God is our help and our hope, my faith has increased, my testimony is strong, and I'm here to tell you, just like the nation of Israel sung, and just like David, the king of Israel, wrote, that God is our help and God is our hope. God bless you.